Part 1: A Summer Escape. It all started on a summer evening that felt hotter than usual, the kind of heat that makes the city feel like it's pressing down on your chest, stealing the air from your lungs. I had lived there for years, surrounded by tall buildings, endless noise, and the rhythm of traffic lights, but something inside me had grown restless. A quiet urge to leave, even just for a while. That evening, I packed a small bag, grabbed an old map, and got into my little red car. I didn't have a real plan. I just knew I had to escape the concrete jungle. I drove west, following the fading sun, hoping to find green trees, cool air, and perhaps a little peace. As the city lights disappeared behind me, a strange kind of happiness filled my chest, a feeling I hadn't known in years. The roads became narrow, winding through hills and forests. The moon guided me through the silence of the countryside. I felt free, alive. The darkness around me was deep but not frightening. It felt expectant, like something was waiting. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, I rolled down the window. The air smelled of grass and dew. Birds were singing. Everything was so peaceful that I almost forgot I didn't know where I was going. And then, just as the sun broke over the horizon, my car stopped. Part 2: The Road to Nowhere. The engine gave a final sigh before falling silent. I turned the key once, twice, nothing. The gas gauge pointed firmly to empty. I couldn't believe it. I had been so caught up in the moment that I hadn't even noticed I was running low on fuel. I stepped out of the car. The countryside around me was beautiful. Soft golden hills rolled into the distance, and trees whispered in the early breeze. But the silence was unsettling now. There was no sign of another car, no phone signal, and worst of all, no town on the map. I was utterly alone. Or so I thought. And that's when I saw her. She appeared like a dream from another time, walking calmly along the side of the road, a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. She wore a flowing dress, long and pale like moonlight, and her black hair glistened in the sun, cascading down her back in loose waves. I felt drawn to her, as though she didn't just belong to this place, but somehow was this place. I called out, gently, "It's me, I'm lost." She stopped, startled at first, but didn't run. Her eyes, bright, clear blue, met mine, curious yet cautious. I took a step closer and lowered my voice. "I ran out of gas. There's no town on my map. Do you know where I can find help?" And she looked at me for a long moment before offering a soft, almost knowing smile. "I don't know much about petrol," she said quietly, "but if you come with me, we can ask in the village." A village? I looked down at the map again. There was nothing marked for miles. Still, something about her, her calm presence, her voice, the strange comfort she carried made me trust her instantly. So I locked my car and followed her, not knowing that with each step I was walking not just away from the road, but into something far more mysterious than I could ever have imagined. Part 3: A Village Lost in Time. The path we walked was narrow and overgrown, winding between trees and tall grass that brushed against my legs. Birds chirped high in the branches, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and something sweet I couldn't quite name. We walked for what felt like hours, though perhaps it was only 30 minutes. I was too enchanted by my surroundings and by her to check the time. Eventually the trees opened up and I saw it. A village. Small, quiet, and almost too perfect. The houses were all black and white, timber-framed with thatch roofs. Their windows had wooden shutters, and smoke curled from some chimneys. Animals wandered freely. Goats, chickens, even a slow-moving cow. Everything looked clean, cared for, but old. Not neglected, just from another era. "This isn't on the map," I murmured. The girl smiled again, but said nothing. She led me to a house at the edge of the village and held open the door. "Come in, please," she said. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. It was warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth, and a pot hung over it, bubbling with the smell of stew. The wooden floors creaked beneath my feet. Everything was simple but spotless. Hand-woven rugs, old furniture, shelves lined with herbs, dried flowers, and pottery. Her parents greeted me kindly. Her mother wore a long dress and apron, her hair tied back with a ribbon. Her father, tall and broad, extended his hand with a smile. "You've come far," he said. "Sit, you must be tired." They gave me something to drink. It was dark brown, thick, and had a flavor like nothing I'd ever tasted. Rich, earthy, and powerful. I felt it rush through me like warmth spreading from the inside. I thanked them, though I wasn't sure what I had just consumed. Yeah, I asked about petrol, feeling awkward. Petrol? The old man repeated, puzzled. I'm not sure what that is. And I tried to explain. Fuel, cars, engines, but he simply smiled. We use horses, friend, he said. He blinked. Horses? No one had said that seriously to me in my entire life. The girl, whose name I still hadn't asked, sat across from me and watched with quiet amusement. I looked around again. The wooden beams, the hand-drawn curtains, the lack of electricity. A strange thought crept into my mind. Where am I, really? But I didn't want to ask. Not yet. Because somehow in that strange little house, surrounded by these gentle, curious people, I felt safe. And, for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I felt like I had come home. Part 4, her name was Mary. I spent the rest of the day in that quiet village, and the more time passed, the more I realized something strange was happening. Not in a terrifying way, nothing felt dangerous, but in a quiet, creeping way that made my thoughts feel slow and dreamy, like I was half awake. After the meal, the girl invited me into the garden behind the house. The sun was lowering now, casting long golden beams across the fields. Flowers bloomed in soft rows, and bees hovered lazily in the warm air. My name is Mary, it said suddenly as we sat beneath a tall swaying tree. Mary, I repeated, trying it on my tongue like it was an old word I had forgotten but once loved. We talked for hours, about small things at first, the weather, the hills, the flowers, but as time passed, our words deepened. She told me about the village, how they lived simply, how they welcomed quietness, how strangers rarely passed by. She didn't speak of the outside world, and I noticed that she never asked about mine, and I didn't offer. It was as if we were both suspended in a pocket of time where none of that mattered. The way she spoke, her voice soft but steady, the way her eyes lingered on the horizon when she paused. It was all so familiar, as if I'd met her before in a dream I'd long forgotten. There was something in her sadness, too. Not dramatic, not loud, but always there, just beneath her smile. You seem distant sometimes, I said, watching her stare toward the woods. Mary didn't answer right away. Then she said softly, because I know this can't last. Her words struck something deep in me. What do you mean? I asked. She stood slowly and walked a few steps into the garden, touching the petals of a white flower gently. You're a visitor here, she said, without turning around, and soon, like all visitors, you'll have to go. I stopped too, my voice a little sharper than I intended. I don't want to leave. Mary turned back to me then. Her expression wasn't angry, just sad. That doesn't matter. I stepped closer, feeling an emotion rise in me that I didn't expect. I had only just met her. And yet I truly knew that I didn't want to lose her. I'll come back, I said, almost in a whisper. If I have to leave, I'll come back. And she looked at me with something like sorrow in her eyes, but also something else, a glimmer of hope. The sun had nearly set now, and the shadows of the garden grew long and cold. We stood there in silence, both afraid to say more. Something was ending, and neither of us could stop it. Part 5, A Farewell in the Shadows. Light fell with unsettling speed. One moment the garden still glowed with the soft gold of sunset. The next, the air turned cold, the sky deepened to indigo, and the birds grew quiet. I felt the shift, not just in the world around me, but in Mary's posture, in the way her hands folded tightly in front of her. Something had changed. We don't have much time, she said at last. I turned to her. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she led me back into the house, where her parents were quietly tidying up. They looked at me with warmth, but also with something like pity. Her father nodded once, solemnly. Mary handed me a small cloth bag. For your journey, she said softly. You need to go now. Wait, Randa said. I still haven't gotten petrol. I need to find a town. Mary looked down. You can find what you need in the next town, but you must leave the village before midnight. Why? I demanded. Mary, what's going on? Why are you all acting like I'm in danger? She looked up at me then, eyes shining. Because you are. I stared at her, trying to make sense of it. You're scaring me. He stepped closer, took my hand gently and whispered, I don't want to, but if you stay, you'll never leave. This place, Doesn't belong in your world, not really. It only visits. Visits? I asked. She nodded, tears gathering. Every 10 years, for one day, then it fades. It hit me all at once. The strange clothes, the old house, the people who didn't know what petrol was. It wasn't just a hidden village. It was a ghost, or a memory, or something older, deeper, that defied logic. They gripped her hands, and then I'll come back. In 10 years, I'll find you again. You can try, she said, but most don't remember, or they don't believe what they saw. They lose the path. I won't, I said fiercely. I love you. Mary shook her head slowly. Then go, while you still can. She walked with me to the edge of the village. The moon was high now, the wind cold, the trees rustled like whispers all around us. At the boundaries, she stopped. Her face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes shimmering with sadness. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll be back. She reached up and touched my face. Then don't be late. With one last look burned into my memory, I turned and walked into the darkness. Part 6, the day the village returned. 10 years passed, though to me it felt like a lifetime. I had returned to the city, but nothing felt the same. The noise, the traffic, the daily routines, all of it felt dull and distant, like echoes from a life I no longer belonged to. I tried to move on, to forget, but I couldn't. My thoughts always circled back to Mary, to her voice, her touch, and that village suspended in time. I marked the date carefully, the exact day I had found the village before, and waited for a decade to circle back to that one moment. When the time came, I prepared myself. I didn't tell anyone. Who would have believed me? I simply packed a small bag, filled my car's tank, and drove out once again into the countryside, following the same winding roads as before. I arrived just as the first golden light of morning stretched over the hills. For a few terrifying minutes, there was nothing but open meadow. I stood there, heart pounding, convinced it had been a dream. But then, as the sun rose higher, I saw it. The same black and white houses, the soft smoke rising from chimneys, and the faint sound of laughter in the distance. The village had returned. I stepped into it as if in a trance, my footsteps hesitant, but the moment I crossed its invisible border, I felt it. The warmth, the familiarity, the shift in the air. Villagers turned to look, and to my surprise, many smiled in recognition. No one seemed shocked to see me. It was as if they had expected me all along. I wandered through the familiar streets until I saw her. Mary stood near the garden gate, just as I remembered her, unchanged by time. When our eyes met, her lips curled into a trembling smile, and in a few quick steps, we were in each other's arms. There were no questions, no explanations. We simply held each other, like two halves that had finally found their way back. We spent the day together, walking hand in hand through the village, talking quietly, laughing softly, trying to absorb every moment. Time didn't seem real. It moved slowly, dreamlike. I told her I had never stopped thinking about her, that I had waited, just as I had promised. She didn't cry, but her eyes never left mine, as if afraid I might vanish again. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, a quiet tension fell over the village. The light dimmed and shadows grew long and blue. We both knew what was coming. But for those few hours, we lived as if the world outside no longer existed, wrapped in something deeper than time itself. Part 7, the second goodbye. As twilight deepened and the last rays of sun painted the village in dusky gold and purple, the atmosphere began to shift. It was subtle at first, a hush in the trees, the way the villagers moved a bit slower, their gazes more distant. It felt like the end of a festival, when joy still lingers but you know it can't last. Mary and I sat together on a wooden bench near the edge of the square, surrounded by lantern light and soft laughter. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Eventually she sat up and looked at me. Her smile was gentle but tired, and her fingers trembled slightly as she held my hand. You know what's coming, she said. I do, I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. But it doesn't make it any easier. The villagers began gathering in the square. Not with celebration, but with a quiet, solemn grace, like people attending a ceremony they've repeated many times. They stood in small groups, whispering goodbyes, holding one another, their expressions etched with something deeper than sadness, a kind of ancient understanding. Mary and I walked slowly toward the center, our hands clasped tightly. I could feel the energy in the air change, as if the world itself were beginning to fold in on this place. The lanterns flickered strangely, and the houses shimmered faintly like reflections in rippling water. I turned to her, my heart heavy. "But there has to be a way," I said, "some way to stay, to change it." She shook her head. "It's not ours to change. This place has its own rules." But if I stayed, I began, but she silenced me with a touch. "If you stay past the hour, you'll vanish with us. And not like before. You won't come back." Her voice was almost too quiet to hear. "You'll be caught in the in-between, and I couldn't bear to lose you that way." Tears welled in my eyes as she stepped closer. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise you'll come again." "I will," I said, my voice cracking, "no matter what it takes." And we kissed, not in desperation, but in deep, aching love. Around us, the village pulsed with light. A final shimmer ran through the square, as though the very fabric of reality were loosening. "I love you," she said, as I began to step away. "I'll find you again," I whispered and turned, forcing myself to walk, though every step shattered something inside me. And as I reached the edge of the village, I looked back one last time, just in time to see Mary standing alone in the fading glow before the village vanished into the night. Part 8. Searching for the Truth. Life after that second goodbye was no easier than the first. In some ways it was harder. This time I knew I wasn't crazy. I had touched Mary's hand again. I had spoken with her, walked with her, felt the warmth of her breath on my skin. And then once again, she had disappeared. Not because of forgetfulness, but because of something older than memory, older than logic. The village had faded like a mist, and I was left standing alone in the meadow, with only a lingering scent in the air and a hollow ache in my chest. But this time, I didn't just wait. I had begun to search. I devoted myself to the mystery that had changed my life. In dusty archives and ancient libraries, I searched for references to villages that came and went. I read obscure histories, learned about time anomalies, folklore, and legends that most people had long dismissed as fantasy. I spoke to scholars, to rural locals with memories full of ghosts, to anyone who might know something. The deeper I went, the stranger the stories became. Stories of places that reappeared with the turn of a century, of travelers who vanished, of lovers who crossed through time and never returned. Piece by piece, I started to build a picture. The village had a name once, though few records survived, and its fate was tragic. Burned, they said, during a war long past. Its people had vanished, but something had kept their essence alive. Some said it was grief, others believed it was love, too strong to dissolve. Some villages, it was whispered, had made a pact to remain in a moment forever, sheltered from the march of history. They couldn't leave, but for one day every decade, the world opened to them, and for that short window they could breathe again. But no one could tell me how it worked, or why someone like me had been allowed to find it twice. Was it a chance, fate, a hidden thread connecting souls? I wrote everything down. Maps, calendars, weather patterns, even my dreams. I started preparing years in advance, calculating lunar cycles, atmospheric shifts, anything that might influence the village's return. I wasn't just waiting anymore, I was tracking it. Mary's last words stayed with me. "Don't be late." And so every decision in my life bent toward that goal. I moved closer to the area. I adjusted my career, cut distractions, and built my days around that one eventual moment. The day the village would return. Because this time, I wouldn't just visit, I would find a way to stay. Part 9, Between Worlds. The day finally arrived. After years of preparation, sleepless nights, and countless theories scribbled in notebooks, I stood once more at the edge of the field where it had all begun. The air was still. The wind didn't move the grass. The sky was a pale, muted grey, the kind that makes you feel like something is about to happen. I held my breath, waiting. But there was nothing. No shimmer, no houses, no faint music or smoke in the air. Only silence. For a long time, I just stood there, rooted in disbelief. Had I made a mistake? Were my calculations off? Was I early or too late? Doubt sank into me like cold water. Everything I'd worked toward, everything I'd believed in, seemed to slip through my fingers. But I couldn't accept that. I searched for hours. I walked the edges of the forest, the hills, retracing old paths and looking for hidden signs. Nothing, just the meadow. Unchanged. The map in my hand felt suddenly useless, like trying to chart the wind. As the day gave way to dusk, I sat down on the grass, my heart heavy with disappointment. All the stories I'd uncovered, all the hope I'd clung to, had I misunderstood them all? Was the village lost forever? And yet deep down I knew it was still there. Somewhere. I could feel it like a shadow at the edge of thought. Maybe the conditions weren't right this time. Maybe something had shifted. Or maybe I had changed, grown too close, too eager. Maybe the village didn't open to those who chased it, but only to those who were meant to find it. Still, I refused to give up. I returned the next day, and the next. I studied new variables, old omens, and the positions of stars. I kept going, not because I was obsessed, but because I had once touched something real, something beautiful, something I loved. Mary was out there, not gone, but waiting just beyond the veil. I believed that with all I had left, and I knew that one day, maybe when I least expected it, the village would return. The wind would shift. The trees would whisper her name, and I would find my way back, not as a visitor this time, but as someone who belonged. Until then I wait, between two worlds, between memory and hope. And every time I close my eyes, I see her, standing at the edge of the village that once was and will be again,